Well, okay, now I just look like a man. Just when you thought the hats couldn't get any worse. I'm wearing this hat because it's my husband's detective hat. He's a law enforcement officer, as you know. It's a little crumpled, actually. And this segment we're about to talk about is about political conservatism. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that means and how it relates to law and order. So remember that before this time period of the 1920s, we had the Progressive Era. And the Progressive Era was all about an activist, reform-minded government that was trying to bring about social change. And this is quite the opposite of that, okay? Conserve, basically means traditional, go back to the way things were, have a small, limited government with a limited role. And conservatives typically want the government to be as small as possible, for the economy to be as free as possible in terms of free trade and the free market. And so what we're going to see in the 20s is kind of a reassertion of this attitude that the government needs to be less activist, more conservative, more focused on maintaining law and order, cracking down on perceived radicals, those kinds of things. So that's the direction things are going to be going in with political conservatism in the time period. Let's look at the PowerPoint. I'm going to try and do a better job of getting it, centered and stuff. That drives me crazy when we get that wrong, but okay. Maybe that's better. All right, so political conservatism, in case you don't know, in that big circle there, you might want to write what that means if you're not sure what it means. So under political conservatism, you might want to notice it means law and order, which means that there's an attempt to maintain order in society and crack down on people who are perceived to be a threat or a criminal element. A smaller, less activist government, and also balanced budgets. Typically conservatives are fiscally a lot more conservative in terms of how they spend money, and so therefore they want smaller budgets to go with a smaller government. Okay? So, key to these ideas in the 1920s are the presidents who served during this time period. And the first one is from 1921 to 1923 is Warren G. Harding. He is a Republican. All the presidents we're talking about in the 1920s are Republicans. And this is when parties kind of get into alignment, right? We think of modern Republicans as embracing a lot of these same ideas that we're talking about in terms of small government, balanced budgets, those kinds of things. So, Warren G. Harding, 1921 to 1923, and then from 1923, Harding dies unexpectedly in office. And so his vice president will become president and then will be elected to his own term, and that is Calvin Coolidge. Okay? In terms of weaknesses for each of these presidents, they were somewhat numerous. Under the Harding administration, we had a whole lot of scandals that broke out. He certainly looked like a president, but he didn't always act like a president. He appointed a lot of his Ohio gang, kind of poker buddies, men who weren't deemed to be particularly fit for office, into a lot of federal jobs, and a lot of affairs broke out. The Teapot Dome scandal, for example, would be one of them. That's when on federal lands, they started leasing out federal lands to oil companies to drill on secretly, and then pocketed the profits. So that would just be one example, but he was found to have lots of examples of bribery and just scandal, basically, affected the Harding administration. Coolidge, on the other hand, had almost the opposite problem. It wasn't that he was doing lots of things wrong, he just wasn't doing a whole lot. He was working about 4 hours a day. He was a very kind of quiet guy. Silent Cal was his name, his nickname. Kind of dour. Just not a very active presidency. He didn't really feel that the presidency needed to be that powerful, and if government's going to be small and limited, then his presidency doesn't need to have a lot of vision and grandeur to it. So, we'll look at this political cartoon together in class. In terms of domestic policy, they have a very hands-off policy towards big business, laissez-faire, as we've talked about before, which is just less regulation. The government doesn't really bother big business. We'll see a huge decline in the number of antitrust lawsuits that are brought about during this time period, a decline in regulations like those that had been passed during the Progressive Era. Just very little done to try and rein in big business or regulate business. Also, it was these presidents that began the idea of trickle-down economics. Today we call it also supply-side economics. It was advocated by the Secretary of the Treasury during that time period. His name was Andrew Mellon. And Andrew Mellon basically said that what you should do is cut taxes on the wealthy, and that the wealthy will spend their wealth and create jobs for the poor. And so we'll have a a merit-based, work-based economy where rich people get to keep their wealth and that hard work is rewarded, and then that will trickle down to create jobs for the poor. Also, it was Calvin Coolidge who was famous for the quote that the business of America is business, and that he almost saw business as being like a house of worship for the country, and the man who works there worships there. The factory is what he was talking about. The factory is like a church for the worker. And so he had a lot of respect for business, and he basically thought that business was the goal of America was business, and therefore that the government should not in any way impede trade or over-regulate that effort. In terms of foreign policy, they both were reflected, their policies reflected a lot of the attitude of most Americans, which is to be isolationist. We had gotten involved in World War I. It had been costly for our nation, and many men had died. And some people were really questioning during this time period whether we should have done that or not. So we shun the League of Nations. We don't join it. We also embark upon a very ambitious agenda to reduce arms. This is the one way in which we actually do collaborate with other countries to try and cut the number of ships that everyone has. And we hold that in Washington, and it is pretty successful at actually getting some of the major countries of the world to actually destroy their ships to keep them within agreed upon ratios in terms of how large of a navy they should have based on their amount of coastline and the size of their country and population. So that was the first real arms reduction agreement that led us to actually destroy weapons in American history. We also had something called the Kellogg-Briand Pact. This is when a number of nations, I think about 62, got together and discussed how we should outlaw war. And therefore, we wouldn't have to worry about war in the future if we made it illegal. Which the naivety of that is, it's kind of endearing. Because if someone does break the pact by an act of war, well, all you can really do is fight back and have war, right? So it's kind of silly now looking back on it that they thought that it was that simple to outlaw war, but shows the commitment they had and the idealism to the idea that we would not have to fight any more wars after World War I, which they called the Great War. There's also this huge problem about who owes who money, the Dawes plan. So let me explain this a little bit, because this is pretty complicated. Okay, so here's the deal. During World War I, we hadn't gotten involved in the war from 1914 to 1917, but we had become increasingly less neutral during that time period, and so we had been loaning Britain and France a lot of money in the World War I era. So then we joined the effort, and we joined with the British and the French, and we become part of the Allied effort. So I think in the British and the French government's minds, maybe we wouldn't hit them up for the money that they owed us from the earlier period before we joined the war effort. Maybe we just let that slide since we eventually joined the war effort anyway. So I think in the British and French mind, they probably didn't think we were going to hit them up for the money that we had loaned them before we entered the war. But remember that Coolidge and Harding are conservatives. They are fiscal conservatives too, and they like to have every dime and penny accounted for. And so eventually they will go to Britain and France and say, hey, you owe us money. And Britain and France are going to be kind of like, well, see what kind of friend you are. So Britain and France are going to say, you know what, we really can't get you the money that we owe you if indeed you're going to collect it. Because one, your tariff is so high that we can't sell you anything in your country because it's taxed at such a rate that no one will buy it. And then secondly, Germany owes us money in the reparations that were agreed upon after the Treaty of Versailles. So I'll tell you what, this is what Britain and France says. You get Germany to pay us and we'll pay you, or you lower your tariff and we'll figure out a way to sell enough stuff to your people to get up the money to pay your government. Well, American investors and American businessmen, it's my premise that they really liked the low tariff. They really liked the high tariff. They didn't want to see the tariff go lower because that would mean they'd have to compete with foreign goods. So magically, some American investors get together and they come up with some money to loan to Germany. Germany takes that money and turns it right over and gives it to Britain and France as part of their reparation payments. And this whole war debt problem kind of goes away. It's my sense that these American investors knew that either they had to solve this war debt crisis or the tariff could possibly be lowered, and they did not want to see the tariff get lowered. So that incentivized them to give the money to Germany, and then Germany give to Britain and France, and then Britain and France used basically the American investors' money to pay off the American government So it's not like we were paying ourselves back. It was private investors that paid the U.S. government via Germany and Britain. But it did cause a little bit of hard feelings between us and our former allies, so we kind of soured that relationship. And it also made Germany and its indebtedness to Britain and its failure to pay its reparations evident as well. So it just kind of made everybody upset. And it was really only solved by these American investors' willingness to bail everybody out through the Dawes Plan. Okay? So that's what the Dawes Plan was all about. Is you can see here, I tried to sum it up nicely. It solves the brewing crisis in Europe over debts owed, and U.S. investors give Germany money, and they pay France and Britain, who then pay the United States government. Okay? That is the next thing we're going to be talking about. So, we'll be talking about how urban and rural Americans were a little bit different back then. So, remember, political conservatism, law and order, a small, these are my husband's handcuffs, and his hat. So, law and order administration that was focused on a smaller government and trying to keep our balance sheets and our debts small and become isolationist and decrease our involvement in world affairs in general. Okay? Thanks a lot. See you in class.